This whole idea of this organization that, number one, sounds like some sort of final boss that you would play in a video game, or something like Ta and I would use on our hair to try to restore our hairline. It sounds evil, like genuinely, like.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Behind the Lines, the only podcast purifying the sports betting industry. I'm your host, Shane Mercer. As always, we've got Andrew Pace, the founder of In Play Live. And joining us today, we've got Ta Goodman, one of the pros over at In Play Live. And if you guys want to see what it's all about on the inside, we've got a promo code for you. That is Behind the Lines, all caps, where you can bet live with these two guys. All right, we've got a jam-packed show for you guys today. We've got the Massachusetts Gaming Commission. We're going to talk about how they're digging deep into the practice of limiting. We've got Roga. We'll tell you what that's all about and whether or not it's good for us or bad for us. Responsible gaming has a new face, kind of. It's UFC 300. What does MMA betting look like live? And we've got a bit of a surprise topic. I'll put these two guys on the spot at the end of the show. Yeah, I know. You guys were like, huh? What? All right.
What
anyway. Pace, Ta, you guys are just getting back from Las Vegas. How was it? You guys had a good time?
Go ahead, Trampus.
Yeah, had a great time. Did a lot of value betting in the pool, playing some blackjack. Some responsible gaming, and then playing blackjack on my phone while at the pool playing blackjack, and then made some really solid paper ticket parlay bets. All the things we preach and practice here at In Play Live.
Oh, wow. It sounds like it was a lot of fun. Did you guys make any money?
Yeah. Despite all of the bad things that we did, we made some money doing the things we do every day. So it made up for some of the losses that we had.
All right. Okay. So some value wagers to pay for the paper ticket parlays.
That's right.
We did really well, actually. Like, we had definitely some bad runs, but we had some really big runs of just playing the stupid stuff that Ta Goodman's referring to there. But we couldn't, we have to hit a physical paper ticket. And we went 0 for 6 on singles. And then we finally hit one in the pool, and it was electric moment for sure. But actually, I have a funny story from there. I'll just fire through it really quickly. I was placing that exact physical ticket, the only one that I won. And a guy beside me, he's like, "Yo, bro, what's your lock for today?" And I was like, are you freaking kidding me right now? So I'm like, I got no locks, man. I can't help you there. And he's like, he dropped his arms and gave me this sideways head tilt, don't be that guy kind of thing to me. And he's like, I can't remember what he said. Oh, he's like, Cubs, Rockies over. No. Sorry. It was Coyotes. It was NHL. He goes, Coyotes something over. He's like, I know it can't lose today. He's like, I'm giving you that. Now I need your locks. And I'm like, okay, man, listen, the Coyotes game, I actually should check to see that day if it went over or not. I'm like, it is not guaranteed to go over. That's not how this works. I'm like, it could easily go under. That game could go to overtime 0-0. You're completely ignoring statistics, probability, all that kind of stuff. He's like, what the fuck, man? He's like, I just want a lock from you. And I was like, all right, let's do it. I'm like, all right, let's do this. So I went down the menu. And I was like, take this. I'm like, go small on this, go heavy on this. I swear to God, every single piece of advice I gave him, it all won.
So you did have a lock. You had plenty of locks.
No, the guy, there was no mention of In Play Live, no mention of anything. I never saw the guy again. I never want to see the guy again. And I'm just sitting there howling, laughing, because I was like, I want to see how my fake lock parlay came through for this guy. And yeah, it hit.
That's awesome. Wow.
And then his Coyotes bet probably lost, and then he lost his parlay anyway. So
yeah, right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That's for sure how it went down. That's awesome, though. Well, glad to hear you guys had a good time, that you didn't lose too much. In fact, made a little bit. That's a win when you go to Vegas, 100%. Okay, Let's get into some of the nitty gritty of today's show, though. And this has been sort of a big part of the conversation taking place in our Discord channel, the In Play Live Discord channel, the Pro Discord channel, at least anyway. And I'm sure it's making waves out there in the betting community as a whole. But this is coming out of Massachusetts, and their gaming commission wants to invite sportsbook operators to discuss the practice of limiting. In fact, one of the commissioners said they want to take a deep dive into this practice, and we're all sitting on the sidelines, kind of cheering, like, "Yes, finally, a regulator wants to dive into this." But they're interested in better understanding how and why the sportsbooks limit individual bettors. So really at sort of the granular level, how they're identifying, customers, average individual customers, and making those decisions on whether or not to limit players. And some of the commissioners say that they understand, that sports books may not want to talk about how and why they go about limiting individual bettors, and are suggesting maybe having a behind closed doors kind of meeting with the different operators. But I think on the surface, this is it's nice to see a regulator kind of taking this approach. It'll be really interesting to see what happens when the sports books do go before them. But Pace, just your reaction overall to hearing about this.
Well, it's just like such a oh my God, finally, So I think they also are asking for people to submit their stories to an email that you can essentially say like, hey, this is what happened to me, and this is what they said, or this is what they claimed. And the thing is like, it is a tricky discussion. Like, I don't want to be like naive to that. We as sports bettors that profit over the long term require sports books to be profitable in order to continue to play on them. And, there are sort of revolving themes that come up on this podcast, things like, WinBet and FoxBet no longer being in business, and potentially who could follow suit next in that category. So we don't like to see that. We want those books to succeed, and because of the fact that, we crush them. So there is some sort of middle ground here. And then, of course, you have the pinnacles and the bookmakers that have been operating with sharp action that don't limit winners for years and years, decades, right? So, there is sort of a middle ground here. And I think one of the things that it kind of points to is fair play across the board. And I think that would imply a losing player, not being given increased limits. Not being given access to deposit certain amounts of money, and potentially not even getting some of the crazy promotions that they might get that encourage them to continue to play. Do I think that is good for the profitability of a sports book? No. But it would be something that would be considered fair and responsible. The flip side to that is players like us can't be expecting to wager 5 figures on one market at one time, because we are exposing those sports books to a level of pain and discomfort that's causing us to cover the losses of potentially hundreds, if not thousands of players in just one click. So from our side, we have to have a realistic view of things where we go, hey, you know what? Maybe a world of fair even play across the board means that the limit might be closer to a 4-figure, $1,000 a bet or $500 a bet type figure. But I know, Tramp, as you've sent me some pretty freaking crazy bet slips over the years here that we've been working together. And I think I would ask you the question, because if I was sitting here and I was like, hey, I've got DraftKings, I've got FanDuel, I've got BetMGM, I've got Bet365, the list goes on, and I can bet $500 at each of those and get those spins in and potentially get a total of, say, $2,500 to maybe $5,000 across 10 books in on one market or one game. How would you feel about that, given some of the bet sizes that you put in?
That's a good question. I mean, I'll say this. I've seen some books do that, right? I've seen some books give those kind of limits. Like last night, we were watching the college basketball finals, right? And you could see that on something that big, they were giving more higher bet limits on something like that. Like, it's the finals of college basketball. The handle on that's so huge. And so you see that. So, I mean, yeah, it's part of it. I understand there's got to be some give and take. I don't know that's, I don't know. Yeah, it'd be great that there is a minimum, right? And I don't know what that is, but also wouldn't want to, only be able to bet $500 on something isn't necessarily what I'm looking for either.
Right. And I think that's exactly it, right? Like finding some sort of middle ground. But like, I know, Shane, you asked me an initial question, and when it all comes down to it, someone's looking at it. That's extremely positive news at this stage. It's a very welcomed step in the right direction.
I want to pick up on a point that you kind of made there about how we need the sports books, to maintain a certain level of financial viability. Because you kind of make a great point there that if you're going to be putting down, five figures on something, and so is Ty, and so are some of the other big bettors within the In Play Live community, and there's obviously many others out there too. That sports books might not be able to handle that kind of sharp action, and so there's just a great reminder of it here that was sort of part of the coverage of what was of what's taking place in Massachusetts. And this is a guy, Jeff Zakhodny here, and he's somebody who covers the space, and he just posted this a couple of weeks ago, just sort of, here's DraftKings' annual reminder to investors that they limit sports betting customers, but a warning to those investors that lawmakers in the various jurisdictions in the various states might not let them do it. And it's sort of this warning to investors to kind of say, hey, if we can't do this, this is going to be a major problem for us. And just to give you a sense of some of the language they're using here, we believe this practice is beneficial overall because if it were not possible, betting options would be restricted globally and limits available to customers would be much lower to insulate overall risk due to the existence of a small segment of highly sophisticated syndicates and algorithmic bettors or bettors looking to take advantage of errors and omissions on our platform. We believe virtually all operators balance taking reasonable action from all customers against the risk of individual customers significantly harming business viability. We cannot assure you that all state legislation and regulators will always allow operators to execute limits at the individual customer level. So a really sort of, clear explanation here to everybody who's invested in DraftKings that says, look, guys, we need to be able to limit bettors. If we can't, we may not have a business here.
Yeah, that's wild. I think, honestly, a lot of what's listed in there, I view that as positive because I read it in the way of going, hey, they know what they are doing could be viewed as unethical. They know that what they're doing could be regulated upon. And then again, like I'm not naive to the fact that there has to then be some sort of middle ground to figure things out. But at the same time, to a sports book like Bet365 or DraftKings, they're offering certain things to draw people in as a competitive advantage. And if they lose money on that over time, why wouldn't you just make some changes to said market, remove it, correct it, whatever the case may be? Instead, they look at it as, oh my God, if we can't get rid of these players, like our profitability, which by the way, right now is still negative. Our profitability is at risk.
I mean, it's at significant risk. Like you said, they're still negative. And imagine if they couldn't limit guys like you, Pace, and guys like Kenny and Ta, right? It would just be, I think we would see them going bankrupt pretty quickly. But Ta, I want to ask you, because you're in the States, and give us your sort of viewpoint as to what's happening in terms of regulation across the various states. Is this something that you think could catch on amongst other regulators where they're going to start, calling the sports books up and saying, hey, we need some kind of explanation as to why you're limiting customers at the individual level?
I think all of this, going back to your original question of Pace, and now to me, it's all part of the process, which is progress. It started out like these states, they're hit with, we're legalizing gambling, sports betting now, and we want to get some of this tax money, right? And they're just doing everything they can. And you got to think about it from their perspective. It's not like there's a bunch of sports bettor lobbyists, right, that are out there saying, hey, you need to make sure you do this, this, and this if you're going to have this. No, they've got these huge companies with huge budgets that are out there, and it's like, hey, we want to bring our sports books here. Let us make the rules for you and tell you how they're going to do it in these other states. And that's what they've started with, right? And now the next step is they've started to see an increase in their issues with responsible gaming, right? Like, I'm sure, I haven't looked at those statistics, but I'm sure they've gotten a lot more calls to their, those 1-800 numbers about gambling issues since sports betting has become legalized, right? And they're starting to see that. Now, for the first time this week, I saw something in my local news, and it was really just a republication of a news article from Colorado where it was like, some guy was like, I got limited to $15 bet on Fanatics, right? And that had been published, like my local news had put it in their website, right? For whatever reason. I'm sure it was a, CBS somewhere else and they just picked it up, but I'm seeing that in my news. So I think there's a long way to go. I do think that some point we'll reach that. I don't know how close that is. I think right now they're probably in an education standpoint, right? And it's going to take one state to say, hey, this is what we're going to do. After probably a year, 2 years of educating themselves, and then maybe it starts to catch on state to state.
Yeah, it's
but that's all speculation.
Yeah. You hope it catches on, but it is a tough market to operate with, and it's not easy for these sports books to turn a profit, and we're seeing evidence of that sort of, I think, regularly now. We here in Ontario, from my viewpoint, a book that went under about a year ago, or left our market. I shouldn't say it went under; it left our market. Was Cool Bet. Then now, most recently, just this past month in March, we saw Unibet completely exit the market. And I think even just today on our Discord channel, we saw somebody posting about Bet Regal, and it looks like they're closing up shop. And so we're constantly so we are seeing a lot of these sports books finding it difficult to operate, and they're still able to limit winning sports bettors. So even with that, it is very difficult. Okay, I want to move on to the next topic here, because it's sort of in the same line, but it's this idea of ROGA. All right. And everybody out there is probably thinking, what are you talking about? Well, this is called the Responsible Online Gaming Association. And so what we have here is a whole bunch of operators banding together to allegedly promote responsible gaming. And I say allegedly because I just, we talk about it all the time here. And if you go to their websites, you go check out their sports books, and you see the responsible gambling messages they have there, they overall just lack substance, and they're not promoting the kind of responsible betting that we would promote here on the show, and that we promote within the In Play Live community. So it's called, yes, the Responsible Online Gaming Association. And the operators that have come together here are the big ones. We got BetMGM, Bet365, DraftKings, Fanatics, FanDuel, Hard Rock, and Penn Entertainment. And they're all coming together to say that they're going to share information with each other about problem gamblers. Okay, this is how they're putting it out there. This is the kind of PR spin that we're seeing, and I'm concerned that sharing of information isn't going to be only about problem gamblers. I think it could very easily be information sharing when it comes to sports bettors that are problems for these books. Winning sports bettors and sharing information, about who they've limited, where and why. I don't think, that is something that, this could very much be a ruse of sorts. And I'm just very skeptical about it all. While I agree with the overall intention of promoting responsible online gambling, I'm just not sure that these are the people to do it.
I think, if you have consenting adults that enter into anything to do with making a decision for themselves, be that going into a liquor store, buying a bottle of alcohol, be that entering an actual physical casino, a brick and mortar casino, or playing in a game online, there's risks associated with all the things that I just listed that could have, a negative impact on people. And I think that because of that, the awareness that needs to be associated with using or engaging in those type of activities is important. I think about, being in high school and a pack of cigarettes, having a really scary image on it of some lady's teeth falling out of her face. And it's Jesus, that's kind of scary. And it's a law in Canada that you had to have that there. But at the end of the day, someone's still making the decision. Granted, they probably don't view that as a decision that they necessarily want to be making, but they make that decision to pull the cigarette out anyways and smoke it and go from there, right? So this whole idea of this organization that, number one, sounds like some sort of final boss that you would play in a video game, or something like Ta and I would use on our hair to try to restore our hairline. It sounds evil. Like genuinely, like it sounds like it is evil. And if it sounds evil, it probably is. Do problem gamblers need sports books to come together to protect them? Like, that's the actual question. Like, think of it from the highest level imaginable. Do we know someone in our network, in our industry, that is a problem gambler? And then from there, if we were to ask them, do you believe that Bet365, BetMGM, and all these other major sports books coming together is going to be something that's going to protect them from their addiction? If the answer to that question is yes, then I'd be like, okay, well, I guess there's a positive to this, but we know how these books operate and we know what it is that they are trying to do. They want to limit winners. And the topic that we just talked about, it's like, you can't have both. You can't form like this conglomerate monopoly where you're sharing all of our information. Encourage us not to use offshores and encourage the state to further regulate and ban that style of betting, which is something that they're very focused on as well. And then say, oh, now you have nowhere to play because you won some money off of us and we've shared the information across the board. You can't have it both ways.
Yeah. Todd, you touched on the betting lobby in the US and how it's growing in strength. I mean, to me, this looks like it's just, building up more of that muscle.
Yeah, I mean, I think that they're in a position now where, I mean, I don't know. You'd like to go into this thinking that they mean well, right? I mean, sure, they've said they're putting, I think, $20 million together to put this thing forward. They're saying that the people who are collecting this information will be an independent clearinghouse, I think is the terminology they used. But, just like we saw from what DraftKings has said, what we're seeing in Massachusetts, I mean, it's hard to believe they're not also starting, prepping for a war, so to speak, on their end of things, right? And
Totally.
putting themselves in a position to defend any way they can.
Yeah.
Well said. Yeah.
On this topic of responsible betting, responsible gambling, whatever you want to call it, Pace, you recently were on the news in Canada talking about the banning of celebrities in sports betting advertising. And, that's something that is now in effect in Ontario specifically, not across the country, but in Ontario, the sports books can't use athletes to promote sports betting, but they can still use athletes to promote responsible gambling. And so I want to just share this one with everybody, with all of our audience out there, because I thought this was pretty interesting here. When I first saw this one pop up, and it's a nice way to kind of sidestep the rules.
Did you know BetMGM has responsible gambling tools so you don't get carried away?
I never get carried away. Well, there were the bobbleheads. And the playoff beer.
Chili's ready.
Well, those tools could really help.
Don't forget about the backyard rink.
Yeah, these tools are pretty great.
BetMGM is committed to making gambling safe and fun with responsible gambling tools, so you don't get carried away.
All right, so there it is. Again, BetMGM with a clever, witty ad. BetMGM probably puts out the best ads. I gotta say, they crush it when it comes to the ad game, and they do a very effective job at leveraging celebrities and athletes in these hilarious ads. But here we go. We've got Conor McDavid can't be used to promote sports betting anymore in Ontario. So instead, hey, let's have him promote responsible gambling in Ontario. And he's probably already signed the contract, and he's probably committed to a certain, number of years or a certain number of ad spots or both. And they're like, what are we going to do? Hey, let's get him to do our responsible gambling. But, Pace, you were on the news talking about this very idea. Are you at all surprised to sort of see this very quick pivot from BetMGM?
So there's sort of a philosophy when it comes to regulation or red tape associated with people wanting to do a certain thing that they were previously able to. And like a really good example is taxation. So if you enter an extremely high tax bracket in a certain state, province, country, whatever the case may be, studies show that people that are in those very high tax brackets, they spend time, energy, money, and resources to then find loopholes or ways to get around said red tape to then keep their tax bracket consistent. Whereas if the taxes were potentially lower, they will the argument is that they would spend less time focusing on loopholes and more time focusing on their lives, their businesses, whatever the case may be. That can lead to A, B, C, and D. I feel like what we just watched is such a good example of that in this industry. So BetMGM kind of laughs and goes, "Hey, Ontario, you said I can't use Conor McDavid and Austin Matthews for these things, but we can now use them in this way." So they throw out the responsible thing with their site, with their logo, with their brand. They fire a couple jokes in there, and the carried away is the version of saying like it was kind of funny and cool to get carried away, which implies, of course, that that's what that person will do with sports betting itself. So credit BetMGM for a creative way to get around the regulation. And, you know, the regulators in Ontario throwing that in there. I mean, you know, they started to take steps, but you know, here is the product of those steps. It's the sports book still pressing on. It isn't like Conor McDavid's doing what who's the quarterback from the Arizona Cardinals, played in arena football. Kurt Warner. It's not like Kurt Warner, who is actually the face of a responsible gaming, sort of commissioner community. It's very different.
Yeah. And I like that, don't get carried away, but it's a lot of fun to get carried away. Right.
Yes,
that's kind of the underlying message there. Right. Ta, what's it look like when you throw on the TV in the States? This is sort of, very Canada specific here, but I'm assuming that it's just a complete free for all down there. And you're seeing every athlete, every celebrity endorsing some sports book, and it's getting just shoved in your face everywhere you go.
Yeah, I mean, and it has been for several years, right? Since 2019. Yeah, I mean, it just is that way. I think we've probably said it before. I mean, I think they can spend some time on something a little more important than celebrity endorsements, right?
Totally.
Yeah. Well, that it works though, right? And it certainly reaches. And I think a big focus pace when you were on was how it reaches young people, right? And perhaps us, being a little bit older, and not necessarily as impressionable or as influenced by athletes and celebrities, but younger people certainly are. And I know I definitely was when I was younger. Yeah,
Shane, I got a closet full of Steph Curry kicks, man. I got Brady bobbleheads, rings. Like, I think Taw's got like a pretty sick autographed Peyton Manning jersey. Like,
Oh, yeah.
We're young at heart, and this stuff, it does work. Like, it is effective. If you love Conor McDavid, studies show that you're like exponentially more likely to wager on BetMGM than any other sports book because you are a Conor McDavid fan. Not only will that person validate the product when you watch said advertisement, and this is separate from sports betting, it's just celebrity endorsements in general. They provide validation, but separately of that, someone that doesn't see the ad, followers of that person in any capacity, be that social media or actual fanship, you reached your arm into all of those people almost instantly, because what happens is, and this happened to me as a Tom Brady fan. Hey, did you see the Tom Brady? I think it's BetMGM too, isn't it?
Yep.
Did you see the Tom Brady BetMGM ad on the Super Bowl? Because they know I love Tom Brady. So all of a sudden that reach came out to me without even intending to it, because they know I'm a fan of that person. Right. So, yeah, it's effective.
Yeah. All right. We are fans, at least Ta, you and I are. Pace, I don't know how much of a fan you are of mixed martial arts, but if you are a fan of mixed martial arts, this is a massive week. It's UFC 300 this weekend. And to think that this sport started when we were kids, right? Like, this is something that we saw the inception of this. I can't say that for any of the other big major sports, right? But this is something that we saw created from the ground up. And here we are at UFC 300. And I want to just kind of elicit some, ways to go about betting on the UFC that isn't just throwing darts. And before we get into that, I just have to give a shout out. I get to a guy within our community who calls UFC. This is mostly pregame, but big shout out to Vice Right Tim, who gives us a lot of winning picks inside the In Play Live community when it comes to UFC. His picks are straight fire. And big shout out to him and for everything he does. But Ta, I know that you are that you enjoy placing wagers on the UFC and other mixed martial arts as well. What advice would you give out there to people who, maybe, haven't looked at it very closely, or maybe they love UFC and mixed martial arts, kind of like I do, but never really quite knew how to bet on it?
First piece of advice, if you might consider joining In Play Live, and somebody can tell you the kind of wagers they like on MMA. Second piece is, if you're just watching this and you're like, oh, I want to bet on the UFC fight, set a budget, right? You know what I mean? If you're typically, the way I bet on UFC is more recreational than I do on anything else. I still try to make money on it, but I'm certainly not, I don't know as much about UFC as I do the NFL or college basketball or a lot of things. So set a budget, right? You can watch a UFC fight and, it's kind of like playing. If you're just out and you're just wanting to gamble on it, set a budget like you would if you were going to the casino or something like that, right? That's another way to handle it if you're just trying to have fun with that. But, the way I like to do it, it's the only sport I parlay anything in. I don't parlay any sports. I think that the UFC inherently, big favorites win more often than not. And you can parlay multiple big favorites together to kind of put together, and that's my system of getting multiple fights together to kind of enjoy the entire card. That's one way to do that. And there's plenty of fights in this card and plenty of big favorites.
Yeah. I just pulled up the card here. And look, there's some really great fights on this card that just look like, from a pure entertainment aspect, like it should be, a night full of a lot of action. But I like that you brought up, what you do for the parlays, because I got to say, it's not something that I ever did before. And I don't do much pregame. And I guess when it comes to UFC, it's hard to call it maybe pregame, but, before the fight starts, kind of betting. But once you sort of, showed the community that structured parlay that you do, it's something that I kind of got into a little bit, and it's something that I kind of do on a regular basis now. And I gotta say, it's a very effective way to have fun watching the fights. I'm already interested in it, but also it's been somewhat profitable. I haven't lost money betting on UFC because of that, and the way that it's structured in this sort of pyramid kind of way. So I really appreciate you kind of sharing that with the community, because it's something that I've built off myself. And the idea that a lot of favorites typically do win, and that's not going to be necessarily the case for UFC 300 here, when you have this kind of a card where it's we got a lot of big names, right?
Yeah. So another thing I would say about it is, keep in mind, it's like any other sport, right? If you're going to be live betting the UFC, maybe you're watching and you're like, oh my gosh, he's really killing him, and you're getting really good odds. Keep in mind you're delayed. You're not seeing this live, right? And that's really important in the UFC, where a takedown or a knockdown or a submission can change the fight instantly. So it's really important to take things like that into consideration. If you are betting on the UFC fights and you're live betting, just make sure you know exactly what's happening. But one of the other things I like to do live betting UFC is look at all the lines and find those outliers, just like we would for other things, right? Find the books that have outlier lines, and is there value, is there not value, and make that assessment.
Pace, do you do any MMA betting? And if you were betting live on MMA, what might that look like?
Well, I could give you guys a little backstory, actually. So I had a joke running with my buddies. I actually love throwing the fights on, and we said we were going to create a book on how to bet UFC. And we assigned scores to the people as they walked out and we saw them. So this was we don't know who they are. We don't know anything about them at all. So we'd say, where are they from? If they're from Brazil, they get an extra point. How scary do they look? How tall are they? how angry are they coming out on, someone throws a front flip or back flip down in the ring, like we'd give them bonus points, and then we'd bet on them. And this was our quote unquote system, for lack of a better term. It was just pure entertainment, pure degenerate betting. And I don't know if we ever won a bet or a card, or we just lost everything, right? But that's kind of the jokes behind it, right? But then when we launched In Play Live, people would be like, "Oh, Pace, do you do UFC?" And I'm thinking to myself, like, there's a lot of things that I kind of got thrown into a little bit, where I was really good at a couple of things, and that kind of formed our skeleton or foundation of what it is that we were doing. But then, I'm like, geez, people are wanting some UFC stuff. I tried to do some stuff. And then, Tim came along, and he just basically said, like, hey, man, I'm a big UFC guy. And he had a bunch of success with the community. And he's kind of done things, ever since that time. And when you say, like, hey, do you bet on UFC? Like, I'll tail some of his picks sometimes if it's a really, kind of entertaining sort of card. But what I have seen is, from the time that I first described of me just trying to handicap games based on how angry looking someone was to today, there was actually a lot more to bet on back then. And I think one of the reasons for that is because books were ridiculously vulnerable with UFC, because in the middle of the round, you could still continue to wager anything from will it finish in that round? How it will finish in that round? Will it go the distance? Will it not? When will it end? Like, everything that you'd see in a pregame menu, they were still being offered live. And I think that created ridiculous amounts of vulnerability. I remember, I can't remember who the fighter was, but I remember a major UFC card where I actually wagered on the fight to go the distance. It was a 3-round fight. And in the first round, the guy literally almost died. Like, the fight should have been called. There's blood everywhere. And I think to go the distance before the fight started was like normal juice, kind of like a -110 type wager. And after this sort of bloody affair and beating that got smacked down, it went up to 12.0 to go the distance. And I looked at it from the side of, if this guy just survived this, he can survive anything. So sure enough, I actually cashed that wager. And that was certainly an opportunity where I was like, I didn't know much about the sport, but just thinking that way, I was like, damn, the books were vulnerable there, and their algorithm was just so wrong in that spot. If anything, it's more likely to go the distance, having had someone survive something just so catastrophic and physical. So do I bet on it? No, not really. But do I enjoy it as a fan? Absolutely. And it's been like a real pleasure watching Tim actually, go through some struggles as well, but really come out as like a really prominent and successful handicapper of the sport. So I think people really look forward to that. And if you're not a member of In Play Live, you can dive in and you get a card for every single, not just a big card like UFC 300. You get a card that over the course of time has proven to be like, Shane, you track it all, ridiculously profitable.
Yeah, it's just nuts. And so again, I got to remind everybody, Behind the Lines, all caps, is the promo code if you want to join. And Viceroy Tim's picks are just tip of the iceberg when it comes to calls made. But from a pregame standpoint, yeah, it's kind of like him and Schroeder, for our pregame guys. And
totally,
yeah, he just crushes it.
The other thing too, I'll say about what you guys were referencing with the parlay, you kind of talk about the entertainment side of things and like a big fight with a big card, and then a guy like Trampus who's checking out some of the fights, maybe he doesn't like a certain favorite, maybe he does like one more, and builds together this parlay that sounds like, Shane, that you're not losing on over the course of time, which is a really positive thing. That's a great way to recreationally have betting entertainment associated with something that is also responsible. Like, if you simply put that in and you don't wager for the rest of the night, what a fun way to enjoy like a night with the fights on. So I think that's like from a responsible and entertainment sort of gambling side of things that maybe doesn't have positive expected value. I'm not referencing this particular strategy or UFC parlays in general. Just I'm more so referencing parlays as a whole. A good way to enjoy it.
Yeah, it's a ton of fun, but also, and Tom, I'm sure you can speak to this, it's a great way to butter books. I always, like, if I open up a new book, I'm like, oh, it's Saturday, my UFC structured parlay is going on that book.
Right.
Smart.
Yeah, I'm sure that you've done that quite a bit, Todd, as you roll through books quite a bit, and need to get that butter in there.
Yeah, I enjoy betting UFC. Enjoy placing my bets at lots of websites. Whoever will take my action, and enjoy making money at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Can I actually ask you a question, Todd? Because you you don't call a ton of live MMA, but you definitely have called some. Have you noticed like the regression in markets over the last sort of, I don't know, 5 years, let's say, number one, and number two, I know you talked about outlying lines. What are you looking for if you do bet live?
So, break that down one at a time. I'd say in the United States and the regulated markets in the last 5 years, those lines have pretty much been the same. I don't think they've changed a lot in the last 5 years. They've not had those. I don't think there's any place where I can bet to go to distance or anything like that, because they're vulnerable, right? And maybe they picked up on that early on. My real passion. Well, I've always watched the UFC a little bit, but not a lot. Just like anything else, in 2020, when we lost sports, the UFC continued, right? And it was like, this is something I can bet. This is something I enjoy and enjoyed a whole lot. So to the live betting the UFC, there's any number of things. If you know anything about the fighters going in, maybe they get off to a slow start, right? Maybe you know that about a fighter every time, and you see the odds change. But it's a 5-round fight, and he picks up as the rounds go on. Things like that are things to look at. But you've got to know stuff about the fighters and potentially do some tape study and things of that nature. Which those are the things you kind of look at. You can't just be like, or you can also look. I mean, some of it is. Another thing I like to look at is if I think that a sports book has. I mean, essentially, the weird thing about MMA is it's closed scoring, right? You don't know, if you don't know anything about UFC or MMA, you don't know who won that round, right? It's subjective. And so, like, two judges can say, well, this guy won and another guy won it. But you don't know until the end. And so the sports books are basically judging it as well, right? And sometimes you can see that maybe they don't recognize something. Maybe a point was taken away, or maybe a point is about to get taken away. Or maybe that's really a 10-8 round we just saw instead of a 10-9 round, and the sports books aren't accepting that. Or maybe we have this big underdog who just won 2 rounds and there's only 1 round left, and unless this guy finishes him, it's the only way he's going to lose, right? And so those kind of things are things I kind of look at live.
Yeah, I guess too, like a card like this one coming up where you talk about having big favorites. Of course, all the big favorites could win, but at the same time, like as sports bettors, we know like underdogs win all the time. And it's kind of like the whole March Madness. I'm going to bet every underdog strategy thing, right? Where you go, you just need one to break even in a lot of cases. You might have like this big, 6.0 type payout that pays for 5 or 6 losses and gets you back to even. But if you're scoring things and you recognize that this favorite is actually being beat and they were like an 8.0 or 10.0, plus 900 type pregame underdog, you can sometimes get the opportunity where they potentially are up heading into the 3rd round and you're still getting a good line on this big underdog because of how skewed the early line or the closing line was. And I mean, how often are you betting in the middle of the round, or is it all between the round?
I'd say half the bets are in the middle of the round.
Yeah, see, and even then, like I've noticed a lot of books closed completely during the round. Right. Once the rounds are actually on, you actually have to wait for the break to get a wager in, and by then you may have missed the opportunity.
Exactly. Yeah. That's right. But that's where the advantage is, right? When those books are staying open, they're still vulnerable because how does an algorithm factor in? Oh, this guy got knocked down, and so it's a lot of human interaction in that. And if they're you watching it yourself, if you have any edge, you can kind of pick up on some of those things. And so that's why it is mid-round sometimes.
Right. Yeah. Cool.
It just happens so fast, right? The action is so quick all the time, and your moment could pass and come back again, and it could be all within 15 to 20 seconds in MMA. But I want to move on to another individual sport, one that is a lot slower than UFC, perhaps a lot less physical. And I think it's one that we all enjoy, and there is a very, very significant event happening in it this week. It is the Masters. Pace, give me your lock. Who's going to win the Masters?
So in 2019, I picked two golfers to win the Masters, and I picked Tiger Woods and I picked Brooks Koepka, and I cashed out of Brooks on like the 16th hole, or maybe it was the 14th hole, and then Tiger went on to win. So I had a really good tournament then. One of my biggest and earliest bets was I took Bubba Watson at like 56-1 to win the Masters. Whatever year it was that he won twice. I don't know, whatever the first year was. So I was pretty stoked on that, but I've kind of stopped doing that. That was a little bit more recreational and gambly, I would say. I don't have any locks, but what I will say is like golf has just been under, I don't follow golf all that much, but golf has just like really been under like a crazy amount of turmoil with, the live and everything like that. And the Masters, I feel like, is just this holy grail of sporting events where, you see guys like Freddie Couples coming back and playing still, and doing well in the last decade. You've seen him atop the leaderboard a couple times, heading into Saturday. And, there's a certain type of player that plays that course well. And obviously everyone gets really excited about the Tiger Woods hype. Like, can he do it again? He kind of already checked that box, I feel, in 2019 when he did do it again. But yeah, I mean, it's a really freaking fun weekend of golf, and it is the thing that brings everyone together with all the turmoil that the leagues have seen, where you get the best of the best, and there's only one Masters. And in the grand scheme of things, there's 4 majors throughout the year. People get really excited for the majors. There's nothing like this one.
No, this is the one. Out of all the majors, this is definitely kind of the crown jewel, I think. And you brought up Tiger. He did say this week that he thinks if he puts it all together, he has another green jacket in him. Todd, would you put any money on Tiger Woods? Is there any golfer that you would take to win the Masters?
No, I wouldn't bet any money on Tiger Woods. I like Tiger, always have, but I wouldn't want to put my money in harm's way with Tiger Woods this weekend. I don't know. I'm certainly not a golf pro. I would never go and tell everybody to bet something. That being said, I'm looking at the list here, and if I was going to pick somebody on this list, so like a mid-level guy like Xander Schauffele, 14-1,
Yeah.
Or better, depending on the site. Maybe a more of a long shot. I'd look at Will Zalatoris at 45-1. So those are like
Will.
Those are two very different. I'm not gonna. I mean, obviously John Rahm, is a great golfer. Could easily win. I think he won last year, right? Scotty Scheffler won 2 years ago. Easily win. Those are going to be the popular picks. Scotty Scheffler would be your lock. You got to bet him, right? But if I'm picking just mid-level guys, Xander Schauffele to get it done, and then a long shot, Will Zalatoris. He's been competitive in these majors.
You know what, Shane, since you brought this topic up, I have to say, because it's another major thing like UFC 300 where a lot of people are betting, and there might be some golf pros that would hear what I'm about to say and be like, man, what a freaking moron. He said, what he said is so wrong. There is nothing I hate more in betting than placing multiple wagers where I can't win all of them. And fucking golf cards with 10 winners on them drives me nuts. And I just came off of a story talking about taking 2 golfers. And that's precisely why I got really lucky in the scenario that I just painted. But that's precisely why I ended up going with one of the 2 leaders that day, because I hate watching bets fall that I know that they both couldn't have come together. So I'm not saying this is a better way to bet on golf, but I would rather place wagers like 2 balls, one versus the other, where I know that I don't require that person to win the tournament to come through, or finishes where you go, okay, I really like Brooks Koepka, I really like Will Zalatoris. I'm going to take them both to finish in the top 10 or both to finish in the top 20 or something like that, where you can actually see it come into fruition and win both. I hate those multi-pick golf cards where you can't win them all. Hate them.
Todd, go ahead.
I don't want to.
You look like you wanted to jump in there, like you had something to say.
It's like anything else, though. I would look for something maybe live, see a guy that maybe Scotty Scheffler comes out, has a bad day one, you get him day two plus, 20-1, right? That'd be something I'd want to look if I was actually looking to bet somebody I like. And then just like we do with anything else, is there value? There's probably no value in Scotty Scheffler pre-tournament, but if he has a bad day one and then you watch him and he's birdieing the first 2 holes on day 2 on Friday, maybe get something then. And that's the only way I've ever bet golf, is that.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things you can take advantage of, sorry, Shane, is like the pin placements and hole scoring. So like a really good example of that would be if you have a really, really challenging pin on day one, the books may handicap that hole from a hole scoring standpoint based on that day and based on historic data. And all of a sudden, you get great weather, or maybe you get some soft greens from, a little bit of moisture and a really good pin placement. And the next day they might be scoring on that hole, or vice versa, where players are really struggling to score on a specific hole that they were scoring on a different day. Those are things that can be capitalized on in real time. The problem with golf, though, from that style of betting or standpoint, is you might only be able to snipe the value on that hole for 1 or 2 groups, and then it might be gone. It might not be something that you'll be able to consistently do throughout the entire tournament. So again, I think with anything that we do, we can talk about like, oh, hey, like you can do this or you can do that. At the end of the day, you really do have to pick your spots, because as a general statement, if there's any sort of blanket strategy across an entire league or sport, it's probably going to be break even at best.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I'm glad you brought up weather there, though, because I think that is important if you are placing wagers on golfers. Weather a factor, and what wave are they teeing off in, and what time of the day are they teeing off in, right? Because that could, weather will change with the day, so you really want to time you sort of know your forecast and know the timing of your golfers when they're teeing off. I think that's a sort of a critical piece of information that maybe goes overlooked, especially if you're just sort of jumping into it for the Masters, right? If you're just jumping into place bets because of this big event that's taking place. But yeah, there's so much, there are so many markets that you can take advantage of live. Pace, have you ever considered doing a 4-day live stream of just the Masters?
We did it. We did it, Shane.
4 straight days of Masters coverage?
The OG In Play Live guys will view this as 4 of the most electric days.
No
imaginable.
way.
We bet 99. They had the whole scoring all wrong, and everyone was helping each other out, and we fucking destroyed them. We destroyed them.
No way. That's insane.
Yeah. Not only that, we destroyed them so much so that it led us to go, okay, how can we do that? And the markets were gone then. How can we figure this out? Where can we find it? And there still are opportunities, but it very much didn't continue because of that. Yeah. It was electric.
That sounds like it. Damn, I'm upset I missed out on it. Todd, were you there for that? Did you miss it?
I was not there for that.
No, too bad. Oh, well, couple losers over here.
Bad betters.
All right, guys. Well, this has been a lot of fun. We covered so much ground on this episode. I hope everybody out there listening and watching is able to take at least a couple things away from it. But a lot of fun, and just a heads up for everybody out there listening and watching on YouTube. Next week and the week after, we've got a couple of great guests lined up. I'm not going to say much more than that, but we've got some really, really impressive guests lined up. So Pace, looking forward to talking to those guys. And Ta, thank you so much for joining us to give us your insight this week. All right, fellas. Well, until next week, keep eating those bucks. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Behind the Lines. Remember to like, download, and subscribe. We are on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, and everywhere you get your podcasts. Have a betting story or want to be featured on our podcast? Drop a note in the comments below. And if you want to join In Play Live, use promo code Behind the Lines.